Great. Now we have about 20 minutes for Q&A. So the speaker should come back up.
I have a bunch of questions, but I don't know how the mic. Okay. So for the turbine, what was the cost of it compared to like a diesel?
The initial cost is higher than a diesel, but the payback after about, I think the payback curve was 3 or 4 years, considering the reduced maintenance, would show that it's more cost effective. So if you're not going to use it for more than 3 years, and logistics isn't an issue for you in terms of shipping, then the diesel recipt is probably a better deal. But the other benefit is, I think, with the piston engine, you can find mechanics all day long. But for the microturbine, you got to send them to school for a week to understand how to fix it.
For the waste heat, did you guys consider absorption heating at all or no?
Well, with the microturbine, that box on top is all you have for a waste heat recovery. Whereas, like with a piston engine, you have jacket water waste heat, then you have exhaust waste heat, and then you have the blowdown system and all that stuff. So all we had to do was run our glycol through the heat exchanger that's provided, and that was it. So we didn't consider any other.
Your sensor project, you're just powering receipt of data. You weren't broadcasting continuously, were you?
The GNSS stations are broadcasting continuously. With the Resolute now, we turn the Rudix modem on for, depending on the data volume, for either from 6 to 17 minutes an hour. And we do a SPD message once an hour.
Okay. And then for the wind turbines, do you guys consider vertical access wind turbines at all or no?
Well, going up to Airbus for many years, we've seen times where I go up there and the researcher on Airbus tried many different horizontal axes, and there was just a graveyard of turbines up there every year we went up there. And we've tried the leading edge vertical turbine. Their first generation was promising. Their second generation turbine was not. And I see now on their webpage they have a new version, which might be worth trying. The leading edge is another UK company. I think there's Windstock, I believe, is a Finnish company, but they're pretty expensive.
And then last question: do you guys consider harvesting heat from the excess wind turbine?
So the Forgens, and with the flex charge controller, we dump heat to heat pads. So we do put those inside the box, and the advantage of having a single box is that heat is all captured for all the batteries. Where our original design, we have up to 3 or 4 boxes, and so those auxiliary boxes don't get any heat. So the batteries only in the main box get the heat. So they benefit, but everything else doesn't. But if we have one box with, especially the vacuum panels, we can capture that heat, which helps, as you saw, improve the capacity of the batteries. So that's another advantage of reducing the number of batteries. We can go down to one box and capture that heat. We also capture the heat from the electronics, which is not a lot, but enough to keep the batteries a little bit warmer. And any warmth we can get, the better.
And then a quick question about the monitoring system. Do you guys do predictive maintenance at all?
So predictive maintenance, it really, of course, depends on the technology mix at the site. We understand well the regular maintenance and helping cue an individual because that can get easily overlooked. When it comes to predictive maintenance, we're really interested now, and I'd welcome the chance to speak with anyone today about the role of battery solar integrations, battery wind integrations, because we've got a hunch on the 5 metrics that matter related to battery health and how we can predict that, and are validating it currently in the field.
Thanks, all three of you, for great presentations. Quick question for Piper. How do you manage the tension between collecting data from people at remote sites and the temptation of those at the central facility to micromanage those people by looking at data and not by calling their colleagues. Speaking from personal experience of having had a senior manager take my very detailed compiled situation report spreadsheet sent to him every night, and for him then to pick holes in it in the morning, that's incredibly dispiriting. I'm just curious about how you manage the balance within your software and if there are techniques to prevent that temptation.
Oh, that great anecdote and good question. My first response is that I almost wish we had that problem because so often the data from the field has been so overlooked for so long that we wish administrators would give the heart to it that maybe that difficult boss gave the rigor he gave yours. On the other hand, just to answer the question, what are some techniques? We've been doing a lot with data validation where the range input by the local operator would be color coded to help flag um, an engine record that hot is not something you should simply record and move on to the next reading. That's a big problem, and many people in the organization need to know that. Similarly, we've learned that administrators may not always have the same level of familiarity with the data they're receiving, and similarly catch an error. A huge learning from research in Canada 2 weeks ago. A gentleman was talking about, an administrator was talking about the diesel efficiency of the gen sets he was operating. And he said, I know I just have to keep this number below 5 kWh per liter. And I said, no, I think you might mean a greater than 5 because we're aiming for efficiencies. And he said, no, they've reassured me. Anything below 5 is what I'm aiming for. And so that was just a great example of probably organizational behavior too, how someone just gets promoted up through the ranks. So that's a role we think for data to help reinforce even our best instincts, or maybe those days that you just needed a stronger cup of coffee and got confused about what you were looking at.
Hi, about the people for the solar power. Can you discuss more about the issue tracker that you guys developed? Was that something you guys developed in house? I mean, if someone retires or something, that's a lot of knowledge that guy takes with him. And do you guys have a wiki or whatever in it, etc.?
For me, correct?
Yeah.
Yeah. So in terms of issue tracking, this is that we're prototyping at this point. We think root cause analysis is a big missing component that humans can add a lot of value to, so that as an item is noted as failing or incorrect in the field, that it simply could be hashtagged, for instance, within the system, so that as work orders are placed, as uh, uh, even messages in a forums noting a persistent issue, that over time, this is why we need this data not to live on clipboards and pieces of paper, but it has to be for mutual learning. Another story to tell relates to field operations where, and I'd be curious in the room, what we're noticing on the village power side is that often there will be a circuit rider role, which is an electrician or mechanic who would travel frequently to a range of sites and be that skilled level of service that Summit Station certainly could have used, because the local people may not know as much. So if that circuit rider had a chance to flag a persistent root cause that they were continuing going back to site for, that issue tracker, as you put it, would be actionable then. And what we're really interested in is if our customers were willing to aggregate and share that data anonymously, how at a similar line of latitude, similar operating capacity, we could begin noticing persistent issues. And just some free advice, the John Deere 6560 is a problem.
And one thing, you mentioned very low bandwidth. Like, how do you deal with that? Like getting to your central server to keep track of all those issues. I mean, what are those challenges you face?
Yeah, so to start with the human side of it, when people are having trouble uploading their maintenance logs in 6 of our communities, someone is taking the tablet from the powerhouse and walking to an auntie's house, a grandmother's house, or the village council or the clinic, and sharing the internet there, which sounds fairly feasible until you recognize how cold it is. And if auntie isn't home and they're standing outside waiting for the log to upload, yeah, time's out. So that's a problem persistently, but I think shared internet is often, or shared communications in a village context, is interesting in other sites that are going to provide self-supply their communications, then our architecture and algorithm is focused on this. First of all, time series data, so that if I am inputting data in a way that an administrator who has full bandwidth is also having eyes on my system, that our architecture will understand who placed it first and which is therefore the dominant data point to retain. Second of all, that in terms of offline communications, it's critical in a maintenance or preventative maintenance capacity that even if the tablet hasn't seen the internet, the tablet is still calculating the hours for hour-based maintenance so that the local operator is cued to take whatever action is necessary, even if it's been some time. And those are just a few of the easy points. We've been what we're noticing is that it's bursty. That sometimes people have screaming internet and it's actually decent for a period of time, but then there might be 3 weeks where it's out. And we are working on a feature right now that I'm calling the point the hostage was taken, so that we can identify that this asset last went offline and went missing and what was she wearing, because clearly that state of in the battery case. So the last time the site was seen, let's note what day that was. And then we need to know the state of charge of the battery at the time so that we can be alerted if there could be a potential issue.
So this will be for Tom. So it looks like one of your major trade points in your system design was being able to shed battery weight to improve, I guess, the logistics profile and also system performance.
Mhm.
Is the kind of the state of the practice right now still convergence on lead acid batteries? Or have you people started looking at other battery chemistries that
Yes,
give
I have,
improvements?
and we have not. Pascal has tried some lithium ion phosphate batteries. I think with mixed success so far, but we're always looking and hoping that that technology will improve. And one of the limitations is shipping, logistical problems with shipping lithium. The other is the temperature problem that has caused some problems also. But to answer your question, yes, we would like to have some other batteries um, because these lead acid is 70 pounds each and very heavy. But again, they do work, and we're relying on those now because they are reliable.
Well, since you guys are up in this neck of the woods, have you had any dialogues with NREL by any chance on
Not
the
us,
battery
no. I don't
chemistries?
know if anyone else has, but we have not. No.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Is there somebody there that is working on?
Well, once upon a time, I guess as prior OPP director, we did have a working relationship with NREL for alternative energy exploration research work in the Antarctic program. I gotten involved on it a little bit to try to find some alternatives to our old northern wind power turbines that we have running at Black Island. It was a long, sad history on that, but it had a happy ending that the intellectual property finally got bought by someone who's willing to invest in updating the turbines. But there was a prior relationship. Um, I don't know if those folks that at NREL are still around. If you want to follow up with me separately, I could try and get some names. And let you
Sure, and we're always looking for new wind turbines that might work in Antarctica or Greenland, or we're looking for potential new charge controller because we've had some issues with the flex charge. So
Yeah,
definitely.
I'm real interested in your comments about the vertical axis turbine, the little one. Um, Especially about its ability to extract power maybe at low wind velocities. Because up on the polar plateau, that's more of an issue, I assume, right?
Yeah, we had that Michelle Kudnick's project at South Pole. We ended up providing two forgings, and they didn't work very well. And these are low temperature bearing in the units, but they didn't produce any power, or at least detectable power. They work when they work well. When they don't at all.
Okay.
Or they work too well and then they burn up the system.
Well, as they say, it's a harsh continent, right?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
And I'd like to take a question from online. This is a question for Piper from Olivia Lee. When co-designing an interface to work with remote communities, has there been any feature that has been asked for in the software that was simply not thought about in the initial design? Is that something you plan for in the budget when implementing this model for software design for use in remote communities?
Thanks, Olivia. That's a great question about how and important to say for 60 hertz, it's a priority that we do co-design with our users because they're going to be closest to the problem, again, under this jobs to be done framework. From a systems perspective, we keep a backlog of ideas that everyone on the team and everyone in business development is listening and hearing and identifying to say, that sounds similar to this. That seems like something that we could address. Um, so she asks specifically about a feature that we hadn't thought of, but that we determined would be valuable. Um, sort of something sort of similar, silly that comes to mind, but again, just your user is going to be closest to the problem. We are working with people that have large fleets of systems where there would be numerous sites. And the nomenclature has been challenging where people are misspelling sites, especially if they're not working in their native language or a language they may not have complete command of. And so getting the naming correct has been an issue or the chance to modify that underway. And then similarly, when a pushed alerts come to an administrator, which comes in our case through email, identifying in the subject line what that community is or what that site is that needs to be identified. That all came from our users. That was a very simple feature that came from our users. There are much better examples that if my colleagues were here, they would be faster to point out. But
Do you guys use spares management at all with so how many parts are being used, recommending how many parts that you keep on hand based on data?
man, that inventory question has been really high on our priority list because as I think Dick would be the first to point out, getting something out to one of these sites, like that's a really expensive endeavor, obviously, that you want to plan well for. And the number of times that people think they have something on hand but don't. One of my favorite stories from an early round of human-centered design was with a skilled field tech with Caterpillar, and he's dispatched frequently to remote sites. And I said right off the bat, what's the hardest part of your job? And this big lumbering guy was fifth generation in his family to be a mechanic, and he broke down. His voice cracked, and he said, "I'm away from home 80% of the time." And every man like him that I've met in the course of this project with 60 hertz has that same moment in the interview. And the damn thing is because they get out there and what they need isn't there. And that is such a manageable problem. So 60 hertz was initially intimidated by what we perceived the volume of parts we would need. Caterpillar keeps at their warehouse just in Anchorage, they keep 9 million parts. And we thought, how can we ever mask that? How can we ever manage it? But what we're realizing is that the number of consumables necessary for most power systems, even in renewables, even in batteries, is much more manageable. And so then the question and the product iteration that the joy will be for us is to determine how to land that effectively so that you can put the local operator through a routine of counting where we validate with photos because even the counts don't seem to be working. It is a simple but challenging problem that we're certainly looking at, but I wouldn't say we've got it yet.
So for Dick, about the test configuration at Summit, was the microturbine on its own small grid? Was it constantly being paralleled with the diesel generator? And if it was on its own small grid, did it have some sort of a governor system that would control the output depending on demand?
The microturbine was never paralleled with the piston engine, and it didn't have a sync card in it because of the concern of the stability and reaction time. So they were both acted independently.
So it was on its own separate grid, basically.
Well, yeah, it was through a series of transfer switches and circuit breakers, but essentially it was a separate grid.
Oh, I was just going to make a comment that Oxis Energy has lithium sulfur batteries, and I've talked to them and they're willing to make them available for tests in the polar region. The trick is that they can only now be shipped via ship. They can't go via air. But if it works for somebody that way, they are twice the energy density.
And
So
how about performance in the cold and the charging system?
I don't know about that. That was the whole point of talking to them to see if we could get some out in the field to test. The lithium sulfur batteries?
Oh, no, I thought you meant the ultra batteries I've seen where there are capacitors that,
That's another approach.
well, that was different. Okay.
And just to
I-
mention some of the
Sorry, I should say the Navy is very interested in the lithium sulfur batteries also, so they're putting a lot of research into that. And that would be a parallel track to follow up with.
just to mention that our jail cell batteries, some of them have been running for 20 years now, so they're very reliable, and we've been reusing a lot of them for other projects. So they're here to stay for a while, but hopefully we can find another type of battery that's lighter and more energy density.
Great. Then we have a short break, and we'll be back with Kate. All right. Thanks.